The head of the country's biggest bank has left under a cloud after an internal investigation found discrepancies in his expense claims running into the tens of thousands of dollars. Last month, ANZ said that David Hisco was taking extended leave for health reasons. But this morning, the bank claimed Mr Hisco had characterised chauffeured cars and storage as business expenses when they were in fact personal expenses. It says the former CEO has left of his own accord and doesn't have to pay the money back, but he has forfeited his rights to about $6.4 million worth of shares. I asked ANZ Board Chair Sir John Key exactly when he found out there was a problem.
Approximately 3 months ago, there was a internal review, if you like, of executive expenses held by the CEO of ANZ Bank, and David was part of his leadership team. He reviewed a number of executives, and as part of that, it threw up what could be some concerns. At that point, we didn't know exactly what they were, whether there was a good explanation. We just knew that it was throwing out some red flags, and he immediately informed me, and then Group Integrity started looking at the issue, and that took some time to get all the relevant information.
Well, so you've known for 3 months, and obviously he announced that he was going on leave for health reasons in May. Were those two things connected at the time? His departure for health reasons, were they connected to the investigation into his expenses?
No, although I'd suspect, his health reasons you'd have to take up with him because they're obviously a private matter, but they're genuine. But I'd say the pressure of this situation would have added to stress he would have been feeling, but no, they're separate issues. Okay,
so what exactly is the problem with his expenses?
Yeah, okay, so essentially he believes, and we accept, that he had authority for using some expenses which arguably he would argue as business, but actually they were personal expenses, primarily in the use of chauffeur-driven cars. So he believed he had authority from the then CEO to do that, but it was oral, so it's very difficult to sort of prove or disprove. So we've accepted that he had that authority.
So what was he using the car for exactly? Was he going to business meetings or?
No, for private things, of a private nature. And then basically the issue here is not that, because, he may well have the approval, and we accept his word that he did. The problem was that the way that they were recorded in our books, because they are what's called a direct chargeback, there was either no transparency, they were bulked up, or they were characterised as business when they're clearly of a private nature.
So are you saying that he was hiding the use of the car for private purposes?
Well, what I'd say is that...
Or disguising it?
Well, they weren't characterised correctly, and he has an explanation for that.
How were they characterised? Sorry, before we move on, how were they characterised?
Well, of a business nature.
And it wasn't just the chauffeur, though, was it? What else was it?
Look, that was the primary thing. There was a bit of wine storage in Australia because he came over as an expat. So,
what do you mean by a bit of wine storage? What does that mean?
Well, if you are an executive, for instance, that lives in Australia or New Zealand, for want of an argument, and you take a job across the Tasman and you want to take your wine and you have to pay duty on that, because he was coming as an expat for a temporary period of time, he didn't want to bring his wine over because he would have had to pay excessive amounts of duty. So he just said, look, I'll leave that in Australia.
But he was charging it to the bank?
The storage costs, and we think that's outside of the agreement that he had.
You say that you accept that he had oral authority to do this, so why is he going then if he had permission?
Yeah, because it's not about the actual use of the money, it's about the transparency of the way they're recorded in our book. So if we...
So his deceit, his alleged deceit then?
Well, what I would say in another way is to say that it's really important that we treat everyone fairly and equally in the organisation, irrelevant of whether they are the chief executive or a freshly minted teller that comes into the bank on day one. And so what we expect people to do is be clear and transparent with us. And in this case, there are things that are recorded effectively in in his records, if you like, as for one purpose when they were ready for another. Now, said he had
but
an explanation.
that explanation, Sir John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that explanation from you suggests it was willful deceit. Is that what you were saying it is?
Well, what I'm saying is it wasn't recorded for accurately, and
why the reluctance to call it what it is? Why don't you just tell me exactly whether it was willful deceit or not?
Well, they're your words, not mine, and I'm not going to put words in my mouth.
No, but it's one of two things, isn't it? It's either a mistake or it's on purpose. So which is it?
Well, the lack of transparency is clear. It was clear that he chose to characterise it in that way. That they were bulked up, and
so how much is this all worth? How much is it all worth?
Yeah, okay, it's tens of thousands of dollars over, a period that looks like it runs for the entire time he was CEO.
So when you say tens of thousands, are we talking high tens of thousands or low
Probably
tens?
mid, I'd say.
Okay, so in the scheme of things, well, relatively small fry when you're talking about a man who earns more than $3 million a year and did up until a short time ago have, $6.5 million worth of shares?
Well, the unvested stock and performance rights. Yes, that's right. Yep, and that's a line of reasoning you could run. But then on the other side of the coin, firstly, David, when we first raised this issue with him, was of the view that the appropriate thing would be for him to leave the bank, and that was an agreement we reached as well. So it was mutually agreed. So
was that what he thought, or did you give him an ultimatum?
No, that's what he thought.
So you're saying of his own accord he volunteered to go. He wasn't pushed, pressured or asked.
Correct. Now, we happen to agree with that opinion and all of those things, but ultimately he took the view that, if you stood back and really reflected on it, he has set high standards for the bank. He's actually been an outstanding chief executive. He's done a great job over the last 9 years, but he's had a blind spot in regard to this area. And we, in the end, if we had a more junior person in the organisation who did this, we would also part ways.
Okay,
and I do get. How can we be consistent?
I get that, the point you're making, but I'm wondering, did the terms of his departure agreement with you prevent you from calling this exactly what it is?
No. I think we've been incredibly clear and transparent with everyone, with our staff, with the shareholders, with
You've known about it for
media.
3 months, though, haven't you?
No. What we've known is that there was an issue 3 months ago that needed further investigation.
And you're calling it a blind spot. You're calling it a blind spot.
Yeah, well, I think in the end, this isn't a matter of whether he could have spent the money. I mean, this is a guy who came to New Zealand as an expat with lots of expat allowances, and at the end of it all, he decided that and believed he had authority for this kind of expenditure. And
do you believe he had authority for it? You personally, do you believe he had authority for this?
Well, I'm happy to accept David at his word. He's been very trustworthy and everything else.
He's been trustworthy, has he?
Yeah, but the problem
even
is
though
that
he seemingly misrepresented his expenditure, he's been trustworthy.
Oh, yes, and it's worth remembering that over the period of time, there's been lots of reviews in different areas, and this was a chargeback of a particular amount, but he has lots of other expenses, and they're regularly reviewed, and they've all been found to be fully accurate.
As a consequence of this, are you looking more widely into other transactions he may have been involved in or other practices he has, given that you've found this blind spot? There might be other blind spots.
Well, that review work of his expenses was done at the time because it was done with everyone, and they were found to be all in order.
Are you looking at any other?
In relation to this?
Are you looking any wider than this? So there's nothing that you're not telling us at the moment?
No, there's nothing we're not telling you.
Okay. When you say that, this is about, it's about values, basically, you're telling me, and that you would expect a standard of behaviour from the most junior staff member and everybody needs to be held to the same standards.
Correct.
Okay. So when the Reserve Bank censured the ANZ recently for your persistent failure in its capital controls, why did the board not take responsibility for that in the same way that David Hisco appears to be here? Why didn't you leave over that?
Yeah, so firstly, they haven't been persistent. It was in relation to the operational risk capital, and I think it's worth remembering that the bank runs about 45 different models. Pretty much all the banks, I think, that have run these models have had issues of varying different degrees.
You are the only bank who currently has had that right taken away from you, are you not, in New Zealand? You're the only one who's lost the right to calculate your own capital risk, yep?
I don't think that is right. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, Westpac had 17 of these.
Currently, now, I mean, Sir John.
Well,
right at the moment.
Okay. Well, so, that's like saying I'm the only person who might have got a parking ticket this morning and other people got them yesterday, but they don't
bigger
count.
than a parking ticket, though, Sir John? Bigger than a parking ticket.
I think it's, well, not really. I think it's worth remembering this, okay, which is that, yes, we take absolute responsibility, and the way that that responsibility manifests itself is that we have an attestation process, which means the directors attest that the models are compliant. And in that regard,
I'm asking you a question, though, about personal responsibility. So a core mistake has been made within the bank. You are the boss on the board. Why are you still there?
Well, because there wouldn't be any expectation from, I think, very many people that you would actually step down over that.
Okay, so that's the way the chair of the ANZ board, Sir John Key, sees it. Checkpoint has tried unsuccessfully to get in contact with David Hisco. But according to the ANZ's media release, Mr Hisco does not accept all of the concerns raised by the board, but he accepts accountability given his leadership position and agrees the characterisation of the expenses falls short of the standards required. Now, Mr Hisco will be paid out 12 months' notice, and previous bank reports show his remuneration is in excess of $3 million a year.